Hi, welcome to today's community chat. I'm Sarah Good, your host, and we're going to be with Dr. Boster. He is at the Boster Center for Multiple Sclerosis, and we're going to bring him on and let him introduce himself and tell us how he got into this field. So, hi, Dr. Boster. Thank you so much for giving us time today.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes.
This is a really special month, and I'm so appreciative that you guys are helping raise awareness for multiple sclerosis.
Yes, as you know, it's important to our Wavy family, and then as we will share with the community, it is important, for that awareness and for people to understand what it is, how they can sort of help awareness, but also how they can know if they're experiencing symptoms or different things like that.
Super, super important. Just by way of quick introduction, my name's Aaron Boster. I'm an MS neurologist in Columbus, Ohio, where I run the Boster Center for MS. I decided to go into MS when I was 12. Not because my Uncle Mark had MS. He had had MS my whole life. I remember, though, coming into my grandparents' home where he lived, and my grandmother and my mother were crying. And they were crying not because he had MS, but because they were scared and they couldn't get a hold of their doctor. And so I told my mom that I would learn to do it better. And I didn't know what I was telling my mom. I didn't know that I'd go to 27 years of school or be bald by the time I finished my training. But I knew that no family should be that scared and that alone. And so, bluntly, I've had a rather mission-driven trajectory through my career, and it's really my passion to help families impacted by MS live their very best life despite having the condition. It's with that spirit that I'm so excited to help you raise awareness for MS Awareness Month. MS is not rare. Here in the Midwest, where I practice, the incidence is about 1 in 350. And I graduated with 700 kids in my graduating class. And so you calculate 2 people have MS and they're both in my clinic. So it's not a rare condition. And so I'm so glad that we're able to talk about it in this forum.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to add that you yourself do a lot of awareness, getting the message out there through social media, through digital. You have a YouTube channel where you give a lot of information out there for viewers and different people. You cover quite a large range of topics. So I just wanted to add that in because you do more than even just treat patients, but you seem to do a lot of educating, the public as well.
You honor me. It's really my goal to energize, empower, and educate people impacted by MS. And so using social media is a very palatable platform because when you go to see the doctor and the doctor is going to tell you something, that might not be the best time for you to receive it. And so I think if you can watch it later on YouTube, then maybe that's a little bit more comfortable. So thank you very, very much.
Absolutely. Well, just to get started, I think for people joining us, could we just do sort of, what is MS for those people out there that might not even have an understanding?
So in order to understand MS, we first have to think about the immune system. So the immune system is the part of your body that fights off bad guys and foreign invaders. So when you're exposed to a virus or a bacteria or a fungus or something like this, your immune system identifies that as a foreign invader and then murders it. But the immune system isn't supposed to attack yourself. No friendly fire, right? Sometimes, however, the immune system can make an error in judgment, and it can identify part of your body as a foreign invader. And so when it sees that part of your body, it does what it thinks it's supposed to do. It's supposed to attack it, except it is part of you. Now, if the immune system inappropriately attacks the pancreas, that's called diabetes. And that's an autoimmune condition where the immune system attacks the pancreas and causes that condition. If the immune system attacks the joints, well, that's called rheumatoid arthritis. And that's another autoimmune condition. Now, multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune condition where the immune system unfortunately attacks the holiest of holies, the supercomputer that runs the body, the brain, and the superhighway, the spinal cord that takes all the information from the brain down to the feet and then back up. So in the setting of multiple sclerosis, when your immune system goofs up, it'll periodically cause attacks where it sees a part of your brain, thinks it's foreign, and attacks it with inflammation and short circuits that part of your brain. And if that occurs in the nerve that runs your eye, you're not going to see. And if that occurs in your spinal cord, you may be numb and tingly from that level down or not able to move your leg. And so in a nutshell, we're dealing with an autoimmune process where the immune system is inappropriately attacking your brain and spinal cord.
And, for anyone out there who is wondering who it affects, I think a lot of people, the first one I've heard of is women mostly, but it's not just women who are.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. This is a condition that typically presents around age 30. Now, it's a range, so you can be diagnosed younger or older, but on average, people are diagnosed at age 30. And it is true that women are affected 3 times more commonly than men, but men absolutely get MS. When I was in training, we thought it was a disease of young white women and only white folks, and both those things are dead wrong. And so people of any ethnic background are at risk of multiple sclerosis. Women do have more MS than men, although interestingly, a man with MS tends to have a more aggressive disease course.
That's interesting because, you hear about a lot of women getting it in their, as you just said, in your 30s, but for men to get it, maybe at a slightly different rate, but then stronger,
Yep.
that is very interesting. I did want to go into, before we get into maybe in some of like the newer research and what's happening now, I did want to talk about, how important it is for that diagnosing early. And as you just said, you just said when people do sort of figure out when they have it, but how important is that early diagnosis in, having more of a maybe treatable or less,
It's a
devastating. Okay.
Very important point. And honestly, one of the huge advantages to a month like this month of MS Awareness Month is really to help people bring it top of mind. Because the reality is, the sooner we can diagnose a human, the sooner we start our effective therapies, the more likely we can make this disease really boring. If we don't catch it early and it goes untreated for a while, it makes it much, much harder to get a hold of. And so an early diagnosis and the earliest application of the most effective therapy is the answer. Now, you might say, well, then how do I know if I have MS? Well, the human being experiences things, and doctors, we call those symptoms. So you experience symptoms, but you don't have a rule book. You look up in the rule book and see what it says. So what I ask is, if someone has a neurological weirdness that lasts longer than a day, you should probably reach out to your doctor. So if you have a numbness when you wake up and you shake it out and it feels better, you don't have to call us. But if you wake up and your hand's numb and the next day it's more numb, now I think it's a good idea to present and have your doctor look you over. In the modern era, getting an MRI of your brain is an excellent way of quickly identifying whether or not you have MS. And so we are able with this technology to diagnose people 3 to 4 times faster than we used to. And as you pointed out, that results in earlier treatment and much better outcomes.
And with how early you could catch it, what are some of those other symptoms, like the nerve example you just gave, that, maybe should trigger you to think, oh, I might need to go get this looked at?
The 3 most common presentations for MS are, number 1, something called optic neuritis, where one of your eyes is blurry, it's hard to see, and when you move your eye, it hurts. And that's because of inflammation of the optic nerve. So optic neuritis is one of the most common presenting symptoms. So if you have over a couple of days, your vision kind of peters out and it hurts when you move your eye, good idea to call your friendly neighborhood neurologist or start with your primary care doctor. The second most common presentation of multiple sclerosis is something called transverse myelitis, and that's a good Scrabble word. It's doctor talk for inflammation of the spinal cord. Now, the spinal cord controls the arms and legs, and so depending on where the spinal cord is affected, you may be numb and tingly in your legs or just one leg. The legs may be weak, and you can have trouble with the down theres, bowel, bladder, and bedroom. And so transverse myelitis is a second common presentation. The third most common presentation is what we call a brainstem incident or injury, where the base of the brain that controls the face is affected. And so in that situation, someone may have double vision where you have 2 husbands when you look at them, or may have a droopy face, or may have a numb and tingly face, or may have slurred speech or something like this. Basically, if you have a new neurological weirdness that's sticking around for a day, you definitely want to present to your neurologist. And you don't have a neurologist, as you probably don't, you're going to start with your primary care doctor. And that's going to kick things off so that we can try to figure it out.
Absolutely. And as you said, it shouldn't just be women in their 30s that are looking out for this. So even if you're a child, correct? Like you could be experiencing.
So unfortunately, children can have MS. I've diagnosed a 6-year-old before, although that's extremely rare. But there are increasing incidents of teens getting multiple sclerosis. So basically, if you have new stuff and it's sticking around, don't be stoic, holler at your doctor.
And a big thing, and I've seen you talk about it on your YouTube as well, but we've certainly done some stories on it. Is this link to possible, whether it's a virus or possible deficiencies that could lead to this? Can you go into talking about that vitamin D connection?
Absolutely, it's really, really interesting. So the way that one gets MS is rather complicated. So there's a small role of genetics. And so some people have an increased risk of developing autoimmunity compared to others. And that's not something we can control. That's just our genes. And that's not enough to give us MS. We then think the risk is increased or decreased based on certain exposure pre-puberty, before you go through puberty. And those include exposure to secondhand smoke or smoking, which doubles the risk to develop MS. Low levels of vitamin D pre-puberty increase the risk to develop MS. And importantly, exposure to mononucleosis, so the kissing flu, or EBV, that's another big risk factor. And so if you supplement a child's vitamin D level and drive it up into a normal range, which you wouldn't want to do without talking to a pediatrician, then we believe it might be somewhat protective in that individual. Now, this becomes very relevant amongst my adult patients who are parents, because obviously we want to minimize the child's risk of developing MS. The genetics increase their risk compared to their neighbors, but then by keeping them physically active and avoiding morbid obesity, by avoiding exposure to smoke, both first and secondhand, and supplementing their vitamin D, we can lower that individual child's risk, which of course is exactly what we want to be doing.
The smoking is interesting because I think people immediately think smoking, they think cancer, they think of other, cardiovascular diseases, but I don't know if in general people put that MS, possibility on the table.
It's really disturbing, and it's not because of the same reasons that it's bad for cancer. It's because lighting a carbon-based thing on fire and then sucking in the smoke is very, very pro-inflammatory. It's pro-inflammatory to your lungs and your blood vessels. It's also pro-inflammatory to your noggin. And so if you smoke, you double the risk to develop MS, which is terrifying. And if you have MS and you smoke, you can speed the disease up by 50%. So quitting smoking is one of the biggest impacts that we can make to slow down this disease.
That's interesting. So it's not even affecting how you get it, but it can also affect you once you do have MS in expediting some of those symptoms.
Exactly.
Wow.
When we're trying to help a family live their very best life despite having MS, I want them to be 5 for 5 in their fight. So let me just go over that with you right now.
Please.
That's my way of saying there are 5 things that I'm familiar with that thwart MS. And so I want to do all 5 of them all day. Right. So the first one, as we've been talking about, is supplementing low levels of vitamin D. And so with the supervision of your doctor, then we give vitamin D3 and we drive that level up above 50, but below 100, because that's been associated with slowing the disease down. Number 2 is to exercise as part of your lifestyle. Now, when I say exercise as part of your lifestyle, what that means is you don't get a reward for doing it and you don't get a punishment for not doing it. It's just part of what you do. And people impacted by MS who exercise slow their disease down. They're less disabled at the end of their lives, which is pretty fantastic. Number 3 is to not smoke stuff. And I say stuff because that applies to tobacco and to cannabis. So I don't want you to light carbon-based stuff on fire and suck it in because that'll speed up your MS. Number 4 is daily mindfulness. I am a very strong proponent that we need to spend once a day minimum centering ourselves in the now. And number 5 is to take the most effective disease-modifying therapy or MS medicine that you're comfortable taking and then make sure it's working. That's being 5 for 5. And the science supports that if you can be 5 for 5, we stand a good chance of making this disease boring.
And with, the mindfulness aspect, again, I think people think of mindfulness, they think of, mental health, and they think of and maybe reducing stress, but it's interesting that can help, you survive and thrive, with MS.
And it's not even a touchy-feely thing. Undertreated depression makes MS get worse faster. Mindfulness, which is unfortunately kind of absent from most of Western culture, is a really solid way of fighting stress and managing stress and treating depression. And so I think it's a great addition to everybody's life, specifically the families that I'm taking care of. We talk a lot about it.
And you also mentioned exercise, which I think in general, can help so many. But is there a specific reason exercise is listed here? Is it for all those nerve endings, or what exactly
So
is?
let me give you a thought experiment. So we take a loved one with MS and we clone them. So congratulations, now there's two. And we give one chocolate cake and Days of Our Lives TV, and we give the other an elliptical and carrots. And we get back together in 2 years. And the first clone is gained some weight and out of shape, but knows a lot about chocolate cake and TV. And the other clone is in shape, kind of a Greek goddess with a strong core and really good cardiovascular system. And then they suffer an attack, an MS attack of left leg weakness. Now, the first clone, who unfortunately was deconditioned, is stuck in a wheelchair. The second clone, who is prehabilitated, she's walking with a limp. And I'm not going to insult anyone listening to us and say, like, who do you want to be? It's a rhetorical question. But what I would rather do is point out that taking the time to prehabilitate protects you against future attacks. It's super important.
Interesting. So it's, preparing your muscles and your body for things that can happen.
Yep.
And with that, I think, if anyone's listening, or if anyone knows somebody that's recently diagnosed with MS, and they might be feeling scared, they might be feeling certain things. I mean, what would you say to somebody? These 5 steps seem like a very, great start for maybe somebody that needs, some help. But what would your guidance be? I mean, to somebody that's just heard this news?
The first thing that we need to do is we need to expand your village. I want you to have the biggest village possible to support you and lift you up, right? And so I want family members to be village members. I want best close friends to be village members. And we need to expand the village to include some doctor types. We're going to need to get an MS neurologist that we really work well with, and they need to become a village member. You are not alone with MS, right? There's 1 million Americans with MS. And so I want you to seek out a community who will support you. And there's a culture of knowing. So for example, my friend Stuart Schlossman, who has MS Views and News, is an advocacy organization with a lot of resources for the newly diagnosed. For example, My MS Team is a non-for-profit with 15,000 MS folks all online talking and chatting. These are examples of this robust community that is waiting for you. As you mentioned, I have a presence on social media because a lot of my patients are on social media. So you can check me out. My YouTube channel is Aaron Boster, MD, and there is a robust community there. When we do our live streams and we get together and we talk, and it's a really important aspect to winning. You don't get to do this by yourself. And so if I was to offer one thing, I want you to expand your village.
And that's a great segue, I think, into talking about, how awareness is so important in the community and spreading this. So if it's someone's growing their village, or, just growing, awareness of MS, I mean, how important is that in your, everyday practice, or just, getting more help for the disease?
It's huge. This is, MS untreated is the leading cause of neurological disability amongst young people. That's a big deal. And treated, we can make it boring, but that takes work. And I don't want you to do it by yourself. I insist that we grow your village as big as we can, because we're going to do it as a team.
And with growing your village, I mean, over the last, 10, 20 years, there seems to be a lot of development in treatment and how people look at the disease and diagnosing. I mean,
oh my goodness.
How have those strides, been made, and what is being made now?
It's very, very exciting. And I'm very proud to have gotten to participate in this process. Think about this. In 1993, there were 0 drugs to treat MS, nothing. So when my uncle Mark had MS, there were no options to treat him at all. Today, in 2023, there are 27 different FDA-approved formulations of medicines to beat this disease. We have found treatments for primary progressive MS, which we had never found before. And here at the Boster Center for MS, we're doing 10 clinical trials studying the next wave of innovation. It is a very rich time to be involved in MS care. And I choose my words carefully when I say this, but if you have to have MS, now's the best time to have it because of all the things we can do to beat it. And so getting hooked up with a good MS neurologist, developing that core team, and really attacking this early on is a recipe for making it boring, which is really our goal.
And in all those clinical trials that you all are doing at the Boster Center, I mean, is that one of the reasons you wanted to open up your own, center to be able to be this progressive and sort of move it forward?
It is an honor to get to provide care to families impacted by MS in my hometown of Columbus, Ohio. My uncle has passed on, my grandparents have passed on, and I can't help them anymore, but I can help another family. And so that's very, very meaningful to me. I'm honored that I get to do this. And, the fact that folks will pay me is almost, makes me giggle because it's such a pleasure to beat up on this disease and to help people live their very best life. I tell them, I want you to have excitement in the bedroom, the boardroom, the playing field. I want you to be bored when you come to see me.
And, that brings us in your excitement, I think, and where we've progressed over the last 20 years to, I think people are wondering how close are we to finding a cure or to finding, maybe solutions to prevent, other generations from getting it.
Humbly, I'm not sure we're going to find a cure in my lifetime. And I'm not trying to say that to be a Debbie Downer. But the reason I say that is our understanding of the immune system is still growing. It's really the last frontier. So Star Trek, the last frontier of space, no, it's the immune response. And we're still very actively learning about the immune response, but we're making great strides. Now, I'll give you an example. There's a new therapy that we're developing right now, which for the very first time ever goes in the brain and turns off a cell that we've never been able to touch before. We know that it's involved in MS. It's called microglia. And now we can finally turn it off, which is a really big deal. Now, if we play our cards right, if we are 5 for 5 in our fight against MS, today we can make the disease boring. And what I mean by that is you choose what you do in your life, not the disease. So that's a reality in the now. As we grow and as our understanding improves, I think little by little, we will eventually figure out how to cure this condition.
And for people that are wondering how this affects people, day to day, when there might not be a cure, coming around the road here, how should people manage their MS throughout the years? I mean, are we talking, doctor's visits very regularly, yearly?
So how do you make the disease boring? I like to see patients in my clinic every 3 months. If you're doing super duper well, we might do every 6 months. We get MRIs, like you see on the screen, of the brain and the spine once a year, and we examine patients when they come in the office. We also do this really important thing called listen to them so that we can learn about the litmus test of life. And then based on that, we're really doing 3 things. We're using disease-modifying therapies to slow the disease down. Separately, at the same time, we're treating symptoms like pain or double vision or bladder problems or what have you. And then when attacks occur, we're using special medicines to hasten the recovery. So we have to have a good working relationship and we have to be flexible in our care. And so that's why a care team is so important.
Right, to notice how you're feeling, how it might be progressing or what's going on.
That's exactly right. And then in the meantime, committing to the healthy lifestyle, the good, clean eating, the supplementation of vitamins, the exercise as part of your lifestyle, all that kind of stuff is really, really paramount to living your best life.
And we talked about, growing your village, but if you're in that village, I mean, what is the best thing you could do for that person with MS in your life?
I think it's to ask an open-ended question and be a good listener. All too often in the best efforts at helping someone, we may flub what we say or be a little bit silly, and we don't exactly know how to help. And so instead of guessing, I would just say, I don't know a lot about MS. How can I support you? Or say to them, can you teach me something about your MS so that I can learn more? I think that's a great way of starting a conversation.
And I think that's so helpful, especially with, events coming up and different things where people might be seeking that community or supporting somebody in their own, just to be able to go there for them if they needed that.
That's beautiful.
Well, I think that, we've covered a great amount of topics. I'm sure you could have got into it for hours. And I think that's one of the reasons your YouTube channel exists. But is there anything else, that you think is really important just for community education purposes that, maybe our viewers should take with them?
Sure. I want to make a plug for participation in clinical trials. So if you think about it, if 0 people with MS volunteered their bodies to study a drug, we would have 0 therapies to treat people, nothing. The reason that we have 27 different formulations of MS medicines is because people with MS that came before us did something heroic. They volunteered their bodies so that we could study something. And so it's a passion of mine to help stick it to the disease. And one of the best ways to do that is to fight back by participating in a clinical trial. And so I want to just use this time to say thank you to the thousands and thousands of people with MS right now that are involved in clinical trials, helping a future generation of patients have a better life.
Absolutely. And then some of these clinical trials, they might even be necessary, I guess, for some people that have MS that maybe, other treatments are not working for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's exactly right. So it's a pretty big deal.
And I think, that is a testament to how many new treatments you've said have developed over the last,
exciting.
20 or almost 30 years at this point. So that seems like quite a big development for everyone.
Yeah, I'm pretty darn excited. My name's Aaron Boster, and thank you very, very much for letting me come on the show and talk about MS awareness. And thanks for learning about MS with me. I hope that you guys take this forward. And there's all kinds of activities throughout this month to participate in.
Absolutely. Well, thank you,
again.
Dr. Boster. Thank you so much for your time.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you to everyone who joined us today on this community chat. I really appreciate you tuning in. And if you need any more information, there will be a link up with resources and other stories on wavy.com. So thank you so much.